Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Jocelyn Bamford, and every week we introduce a new entrepreneur or expert in the economy to tell their stories and unpack the challenges of keeping jobs in Canada, as well as share ideas for economic growth and prosperity. Today on the program, we're going to focus on the impact on unfair trade practices and its negative impact on the Canadian economy, small to medium-sized business, and jobs in Canada. Joining us to discuss today and for a return visit are two entrepreneurs who saved jobs in their area and kept electrical manufacturing in Canada after the large cable plant that they worked in Brockville closed and moved production to the United States. Please welcome back to the program Todd Stafford and Shelley from Northern Cables. Welcome back to the program, folks.
Good morning. Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thank you.
Todd and Shelley, you were on the program in January, and we just scratched the surface of the issue of dumping. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us what is new for Northern Cables? Todd, over to
Jocelyn, you. Thank you very much. Northern Cables, we're continuing on our plans. We've had a pretty significant capital plan process over the last 5 years. So we've got equipment going in. We're trying to hold our direction regardless of what's going on in the economy to the best that we can. We've been fortunate. The new year started with a bit of an uptick in the Canadian commercial business because it has been quite depressed. Commercial construction has been down. Our U.S. business has been steady, holding strong, and mostly data center, I think, business in the U.S. is keeping that part of the electrical industry strong. And we're growing. We've added employees. We're looking at future expansion plans. So we're optimistic, but we've got some speed bumps we have to deal with.
Yeah, let's talk about those speed bumps because some of them are quite significant and impacting Canadian jobs and the economy. Shelley, I wanted to speak with you on your last appearance. We just scratched the surface on unfair trade practices. Northern Cable has been raising the flag. Tell us more about the impact of unfair trade practices on the Canadian economy.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So after the pandemic, post-pandemic boom, if you will, we noticed perhaps maybe 3 years ago, we started to notice the erosion of pricing in certain markets in Canada, mainly on the commercial side. It quickly sped up to become problematic in the last 2 full years. And we notice it most where we see a lot more outlets, big box stores, etc. They're now starting to sell some of the products that we manufacture. And some of these products that we're noticing are being sold at very, very low prices. The first product line that come to know is a product called NMD, and it is the house wire, for sake of a better word. And it is a product that has become widely distributed across Canada, and it is selling at extremely low prices now.
So more on that, we had discussed previously that you found some of your cable and wire products that were being masqueraded from product from China. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the incident you're referring to, and we've noticed this, is that we do a lot of quotations, both in Canada and the United States. And in our U.S. business, when we were quoting some of our products we make that are UL listed, we had firms that would take our product spec sheets, which are widely available on our website, and they would slice off the top banner on our spec sheets. They would replace it with their name and logo, and they were in such a hurry to do this that they failed to remove identifiers in the text that would refer to Northern Cables, and yet they would say they were the manufacturer. So we've noticed this. We've tried complaining about this, but even to complain about this, depending on which country this is coming from, you have to be registered in that country to actually issue a complaint. So it's very hard for us as a manufacturer to know who's doing what and where they're doing it. It has to be brought to our attention.
Welcome back. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. My guests today are Shelley Bacon and Todd Stafford, owners of Northern Cable in Brockville, Ontario. Todd, over to you. Let's talk about unfair trade practices, commonly known as dumping. Todd, for those who don't know what dumping is, can you explain what happens?
Simple terms, it's when usually a country or a state sponsors an industry or subsidizes it. And there's hundreds of ways they can subsidize it, so that they can then export that material into another area and collect currency, and it's below the cost of production in that area. So that then harms any manufacturing capability that the injured country would have, and enables the company that's doing the subsidizing to overtake that industry.
So, Shelley, let's zero in on Northern Cables. Tell us about how this has affected your business and your employees.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Because Northern has been able to grow and be innovative in the way our machines are laid out and what they can produce, when we run into a case where we have product coming into the country at a very low price, we then have to modify what we're making and where we're selling it. This means perhaps moving people around to different machines. It may mean adapting the machines to make a different product. It may mean making a different product that the machines are not laid out to manufacture. It also means we have to shift our workforce perhaps from one of our locations to a secondary location where there's more demand and less of the other. So in a nutshell, it's very dependent on our workforce to adapt. It's very big load on our supervisors and scheduling staff to try and secure materials to bring them in to make these other products we had not planned to have to manufacture. So we have to be very nimble, and we have to be very innovative in terms of what we make and where we sell it.
So Todd, let's talk about the impact on the industry as a whole with unfair trade practices and what it means to Canadian small to medium-sized business and Canadian jobs.
Well, it's existential. The importation of wire and cable could wipe out our entire industry very quickly. The non-metallic building wire that Shelley mentioned earlier, they're selling it at Costco for less than the cost that domestic manufacturers have to pay for raw materials. So it's not an efficiency issue. It's not automation. It's not about robots. It's about what you pay for raw materials. There's actually been a trade complaint filed. It's public and filed in March, and it only took about 6 weeks for the trade tribunal to come out with an initial finding of harm. So there's an investigation underway. They're investigating all of the costs of the domestic manufacturer versus the Chinese manufacturers in this case. And hopefully by this fall, there'll be a finding. And if they have to take action to protect the domestic industry, that's what they'll do.
So what will they do? So let's walk through this case. If it's favorable to Northern Cables and the Canadian industry, what is the next step for the politicians to do?
Well, it's not really politicians, it's actual trade court, which in a way is better because it keeps the politicians out of the dealings back and forth. But if it's quite in depth in terms of the investigation costs and operating costs. They would put a punitive like a duty or a tariff on the products in the complaint. 30, 40%, 50%, depending on what they find the subsidization rate is coming from China, which then will make more of a level playing field. The Chinese manufacturers still probably be able to lower the costs some more because they're state subsidized, but at least it will protect some of the domestic industries. And the case really it's not a Northern Cables case. We're participating along with multiple other manufacturers, but we've probably been the loudest in terms of the need for something to be done.
So, Shelley, over to you. We just got about a minute left. What do you think on all levels, both the bureaucratic and the political level, we need to do to protect manufacturing in Canada? We just got about 30 seconds now.
In a nutshell, Jocelyn, I think it's time the country starts to value and listen to the independent manufacturers across this country. For far too long, the only voice has come from large or state subsidized lobbying groups, but our independent manufacturers, such as ourselves, yourself, etc., we really don't have a very large voice with our federal government. And I think it's time that the federal government listens to the myriad of people that make up this country, that support people, good paying jobs for Canadians, and pay taxes towards our society and all our supporting services.
We're back. I'm speaking with Canadian entrepreneurs Shelley Bacon and Todd Stafford, owner of Northern Cables. Todd, let's talk about what the industry, the electrical industry in Canada, is doing to fight back against unfair trade practices.
Well, it's becoming quite widespread. The products being brought into Canada at lower costs, over the last 4 or 5 years, were directly affected us. But in the last year and a half, since the U.S. has tightened their borders, the amount of Chinese product come to Canada crosses the entire electrical industry because the Chinese manufacturers are looking for an outlet. So there is the trade case is public. I know of several other trade cases that are being worked on. So until they're actually filed, you can't count them, I guess. But the industry has woken up. There's some really good support within the industry. There's been some, our trade publications are being very vocal about supporting domestic manufacturing and the risks of buying Chinese material that may or may not have proper qualifications. It all has a nice CSA label on it, but a lot of it doesn't meet a lot of the specifications. So it's definitely become a more talked about within our industry, and not just wire and cable, the electrical industry as a whole.
Understood. So, what do you think the government ought to do to make sure that the electrical industry and manufacturing as a whole is protected?
Well, as a policy, obviously it would be nice if they look at what's in the containers that's coming into the country and what price it's coming into. It's kind of an onerous ask, but that's really the issue, is that private companies like ours are paying legal bills to file court cases when really government policy should be shielding us from that unfair trade in the first place.
Absolutely. Shelley, we're going to play a clip on unfair trade practices and get your thoughts.
Honourable Member for Windsor, Tecumseh Lakeshore.
Under this Liberal Prime Minister, Canada is the only G20 country to fall into a recession. Just by stopping the illegal dumping of cheap subsidized Chinese aluminum, the government could help aluminum extrusion companies to be profitable and provide jobs for hardworking Canadians and put food on their table. Will this Liberal Prime Minister tell aluminum workers that Canada is in a recession, or just a technical recession?
Well done. The Honourable Foreign Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, we know the challenges for certain sectors in the Canadian economy, on aluminum, on steel, on auto and forestry, and our Minister of Canada-U.S. Trade, our Ambassador in Washington, Janice Charette, who's been appointed, they are having engagement with U.S. administration. And the member talked about jobs. I do think it's important to recognize today that there was 88,000 jobs created in the Canadian economy. We know there are challenges in particular sectors, and that's why the Minister of Industry has been helping to support with targeted programs to support workers and those industries that are being impacted. At the same time, we're focusing on building the Canadian economy across this country, Madam Speaker.
Shelley, your thoughts on what we just heard?
Thank you, Jocelyn. I'm pleased to see the question asked in the House Commons. When I graduated from the university, approximately 20 to 25% of the general public worked in manufacturing in this country. We're down now below 10%. And the question about aluminum is a very serious one. Canada being one of the leaders in aluminum around the world, making it with clean aluminum, hydroelectricity. Many industries are being unfairly targeted for aluminum that's being dumped into this country. If we do not have a federal government that starts listening to these other industries, other than the big ones, big primary ones in this country, we're going to lose all of our domestic manufacturing. We're all being unfairly targeted by firms outside of this country that control pricing. We've already destroyed our lighting industry in this country. We don't have a domestic lighting industry anymore. All we do is import products, and we're trying to have our voices heard so that the federal government will listen to all the independent manufacturers and what the issues we have to fight. We have to pay carbon tax, we have to pay tariffs, we have to pay all these fees, and these other products enter this country exempt from all of these costs.
Yeah,
So
100%.
we'd like to see something done.
Yeah, we need to level the playing field. We're going to go to commercial. We'll be back on Canadian Innovators, more with Northern Cables when we return. Don't go away. Welcome back. My guests today are the owners of Northern Cable out in Brockville, Ontario, Shelley Bacon and Todd Stafford. Todd, why do we not have a manufacturing strategy, and what should be in a manufacturing strategy, and why have all levels of government seem to just push this off?
Well, that's a pretty big question, Jocelyn. It ranges from the overpowering lobbying of the very large, the aerospace, the automotive, the large industries have sucked all the oxygen out of the room for a lot of the private sector, which employ many more people than the large manufacturers. There's been a strategy from prior governments that I think getting rid of manufacturing was thought to be better from an environmental perspective. We just moved the pollution over to China and bring it here on a boat, which is ludicrous. And it's goes into our education system. We don't teach shop in schools. Manufacturing is not seen as a real viable career for a lot of people. Our education system has steered people more to white collar jobs.
Absolutely. Shelley, I'm going to ask you, are the governments at any level doing anything to assist the Canadian cable and wire industry, and what should they be doing?
Well, Jocelyn, I go back to September of 2025 when 7 of the domestic manufacturers of wire and cable in Canada wrote a letter to François-Philippe Champagne and asked him to respond and get involved in the pressure we were all feeling in this country. I have yet to hear any kind of response from anyone in our federal government in that regard. We've tried making our voices known to some of the ministers about this, but for whatever reason, they seem to be perhaps aware there's a problem, but not speaking publicly on what the issue is. And we don't know if that's simply because of there are negotiations with the United States over the free trade deal or what it is. But we in industry that employ people and pay all these great wages and taxes for our system, we need a voice coming back from our federal government to tell us we understand there's a problem and we're going to be doing something about it.
So you received no response from the federal government, and I have read the letter. It's a very concerning letter. Shelley, what would you expect them to come back with, and explain what you would do if you were the Prime Minister?
Well, Jocelyn, that's a tall order, but certainly I think acknowledging to all the signatories on that letter that they have received the request, they understand, they will investigate, and they should ask us for suggestions. I look back to what happened in the United States a number of years ago when 2 major firms in the States initiated a trade action at the federal level. The federal government of the United States reviewed the situation, found a problem, and acknowledged it publicly, and it became a very high profile time for all manufacturers to see that they were going to do something to protect their domestic industries. We want to see the federal government at least respond to us and at least say, we are going to investigate and we are going to try and remedy the situation.
So, Todd, I'm going to give you the last word. What would you like to see the Prime Minister do on this issue and on manufacturing as a whole?
Well, I think the single one thing I would ask is be serious about Canadian content. Like, if you want to have domestic content, and there's lots of good words, there's lots of good policies about having Canadian content, but we've seen they go to a Canadian distributor and buy Chinese material, but the invoice comes from a Canadian distributor, so they count that as Canadian content. I don't think they don't have the resources to investigate and actually prove. I'd like to see what's in the construction site at the Parliament Hill and see whose cable's in that construction site.
That's a great one. Well, unfortunately, gentlemen, we're out of time. You've brought up a very interesting topic and one that is of great concern to Canadians and Canadian manufacturers. So we'll have to have you back again for an update. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to my guests, Canadian entrepreneurs, Todd Stafford and Shelley Bacon from Northern Cables. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovator. If you're an innovator, tell us your story. Write to us at info@thenewsforum.ca, and we'll see you next time.